Today we're going to be covering the fragment part. So this is going to be the first part on how to create fragments and adding them into an activity. So the first thing that you need to do is go to the Canvas website and download the fragment template. So in this one you will find the following classes. So you will find the pet class, which is the same one that we used in previous examples. There's no changes there. Then you will find a main activity, just an empty main activity and a corresponding layout. Right now all we have is a linear layout. So the first thing that we need to do is we're going to create two fragments. So go over here, go to create new fragment. Let's create a blank fragment. We're going to call this one the display fragment. For this one we're going to have an XML. So this generated the display fragment code and an XML for it. So right now that XML contains just a little text view. We're gonna replace that text view for a list view. That should be, let's add little ID. So pet this view. Okay, so this is going to be our second fragment. It's just going to be a list of pets. So if you remember the list view example, it's going to be essentially the same thing, just in a fragment rather than in an activity. So notice that here we don't have a linear layout. If we want to have something with a linear layout, then we will have to create it inside of the frame layout. So in our display fragment code, we have a huge amount of boilerplate code that you can use to transfer parameters for initialization or just to transfer data to and from a container activity. We don't need any of them, so I'm just gonna delete them. You need an empty constructor for your fragment, so don't delete that one. We do not need this method to create a fragment with some parameters, and we don't want to receive any arguments in the onCreate. So just gonna be a simple display fragment with an onCreate that called the super thus far. And then underneath we're gonna have the onCreate view method. So this is the one that's going to be called whenever we want to create the UI of the fragment. So in this case, we're using the inflator to inflate the view given by the layout on the fragment display.xml. Now for our second step, we're gonna go and create a new activity. Not an activity, another fragment. So we're going to create a new fragment, but this time we're gonna make it a little bit different. So let's create a black fragment, and we are not gonna create an XML for it. We're gonna be creating, so that was the list fragment. So let's call this one the display fragment. Oh no, the other one was the display fragment. So we're gonna use this fragment to add elements into our list. So it's gonna be similar to the form that we did before. So let's call it the input fragment. We're gonna be using it to enter input. Let's not include any factory methods. So in this case, we only have an empty input fragment and the onCreate view. Now, since we don't have XML like we did here, we cannot go into our layout. So for this purpose, it's going to be a little bit harder than if we were using an XML layout because we cannot preview what it will look like. So we're just going to go ahead and create a form that allows us to enter the name, breed, and input of a new pet. So if you remember, a pet has three elements: name, breed, and age. So we're going to be creating a little form in the input fragment that allows us to do that. So for that one, we're just gonna create a form that looks something like this. Let's just use this other one to have a little draft of what it will look like. So just having a text view. This uses a linear layout, so if we want to have another one that is right and left, we're gonna have to create a different layout inside of it. So this is going to be a horizontal layout. So inside of this one, we're gonna have the text view and plain text, edit text. So we're gonna have 3 of these. Text view next to a little edit text. So the first one is gonna be the name, second one is gonna be the breed, and the last one will be the age of the pet that we want to create. So now that we have an idea on what we want to do, we're gonna be doing that inside of our activity. So the first thing that we want to do is get the activity context. So we're in a frame, so or on a fragment that is inside of an activity. So to get the context of the activity, we're gonna get the fragment activity context by calling the method context. Calling the method, you guessed it, get activity. So all that we're doing is getting the underlying activity as the context for our user interface. So that's where this will ultimately be rendered inside. So now we can go ahead and start adding elements into our view. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is, well, we need a root view. So let's call it the linear layout. Similarly as the one we had on the XML. Linear layout, and it requires a context. Well, we already have the context, so we just use it. Then here we already have one created for us, so let's call it the name text view. And we're gonna set the text to be name. Now we can simply replace it for a string resource. So let's extract the string resource, name label. Oops. Perfect. And then we're gonna have our little edit text. So it's gonna be the name text. And we're just gonna call it new edit text. And we have to pass in the context. Okay, so thus far we have a linear layout for the root, text view for the name, and an edit text for the last, for the name as well. So we need another one of these. This time it will be for the breed. So let's rename things accordingly. Everything else remains the same, just we're just getting the correct information, and then we need 2 more elements. This is going to be for the age. Great. Let's extract the resources as well for this one. String resource, read label. Let's extract the one from this one. Actions, extract the string resource, age label. Okay, so up to this point we have just a linear layout with 6 different widgets on our fragment. Now we have to make sure that things are inside this linear layout, so we have to add them inside of it. But remember what we had to do in our little mockup to make them so they were right next to each other on pairs. We have to create a different layout, so we have to have some nesting layout. So we're gonna create a second linear layout here, and we're just gonna cut the name line, name layout. We're gonna need to create another one for this, another one for this. All we need to do is change the names. We cannot have more than one with the same name. Then we're gonna have to specify some information about the linear layout. So if we go here, we can see that we require some information for a linear layout. So the minimum information will be the layout height, width, and orientation. Normally we do it with the XML attributes, but here we need to do it using methods. So what we're gonna be doing is saying, go to my grid view, select for view, so it's here, and then we're gonna call a method that's called set layout parameters. So inside this one, what we're gonna be doing is adding a new set of parameters. So we're gonna say new layout parameters, and inside of here, we're gonna be passing in the parameters that we want to use. So we want them to have the same parameters that we were looking at before. So one of them was the match parent, right? Layout parameters. So the first one, we want it to be match parent, and the second one, that's the height, and the second one is the width. So for the width, we want it to wrap the content. So wrap content, and that's pretty much it for those. So after that, we need to go and also add the orientation. So for that one, we have a method that actually does that, set orientation. Now we have that the first one, we want it to be vertical. Linear layout is gonna be vertical, so it's gonna be going, everything that we put inside of it will be going one thing on top of the other, or underneath the other. So we're just gonna copy this information for the other nested linear layouts that we have, because we basically want them to behave the same way. But instead of having them vertical, we want them to be horizontal, so that the two elements inside of them are horizontally aligned. Now, we have to actually make use of this inside the layouts. So we just say name layout dot add, and we add a view. First, we're gonna add the name text view, and second one, we're gonna add the edit text, which is going to be the name text. Now, once we've done that, we could add it to the view itself, to the layout that is going to be containing them. So we can do this, and then we can say, okay, now to my root, add the name layout. The review. So all of these are just things that we've done before. We've just done it using the XML, using the drag and drop features of the XML. Now we're just dynamically creating the UI using code. So this is going to be hText view, and the h layout. So fortunately, I named all of these very similar and very intuitive, so I can know what to replace. Okay, now here we're not returning the text view, we have to return the root view of our layout, which is gonna be this one. Now, since we're gonna be using this particular layout to add elements into our list, let's just call it the add button equals new button, and all we need is context. So let's use the same context that we used before. Import the class button if we don't have it already. And after this, we will have to add the button to the root view. So let's use root view, dot view, and this is going to be the add button that we just created. Okay, it's perfect. On create view, we'll create this particular view. Now we're gonna create something for our button. So since we have a button, then we definitely want a non-click listener. So add listener. So this is going to be a non-click listener. We're gonna have to read the information from these elements. So instead of declaring them and initializing them on the onCreate view, we're gonna declare them at the very top and initialize them there. So similar to how we've done before with other UI elements, just that instead of using the find text view to initialize them, we are using the new keyword to initialize them. So this one will be the read text, and this will be the age text. So we're gonna remove the declarations from here, so they will actually point to these elements. We will look at the on-click view later on. Let's add a to-do here, implement this one. For now, all that we're gonna be doing is getting the elements. So the name, the breed, and then the age. So for this one, we're gonna say this is going to be the breed text dot get text. Let's convert it to a string. Nothing new there. We've done this before. And this is going to be the same thing, but it's going to be the name text instead. And this one is going to be just a little slightly different because we need an integer. So we're going to use some casting. This is a Java thing, so if you're not familiar with it, you can call integer.parseInt and pass a string to it, and it will basically convert the string that you put here into the integer number representation of it. Okay, that's all that we have to do there. So now we have the display fragment, which has a list, and the input fragment, which has the fields necessary to enter information into it. Now we have our main activity, and we want to actually put those fragments into our activity. So for this purpose, we're gonna use the XML. So we have a linear layout. All that we have to do is say that we want to put a fragment inside of it. So we can go to the containers, and just drag two fragments. Select which one you want on top. We want the input at the top, and then we want to have the display at the bottom. So we have two fragments, one after the other. Here we could preview this one, which is the one that has a XML representation of it. So we could modify this one. No, I don't need that tag. Unknown fragments. Use layout display fragment. Okay. So here we can go and pick up our fragments. That is the layout that we want to show here. So let's look for that one. Fragment display. Perfect. So here, all that we did is modify the XML down here so that it will know that the layout of this fragment is this one, and we can actually preview it here. For the first one, we don't have that option because we don't have an XML layout for it. It is being created, the UI is being created in runtime, so we don't have a way to address that. One thing that we're gonna be doing here, just to make sure that the elements do not fall out of line or that they don't fit more space than necessary, is that we're gonna modify this XML such that by using the properties of the linear layout, we can say Android layout weight. So we're gonna set both of them to 1. That basically means that both of them are gonna be occupying roughly the same amount of space. If we made it so one of them is a 2 and the other one is a 1, it means that this one will occupy twice as much space as this one. Right now, we just want them to be like this. I'm gonna fix this fragment like this to be different. Split fragment and edit fragment. Okay, perfect. Now we can go ahead and run our app. Now to this point, all that we've done is creating fragments and adding them to the main activity. There's not that much of a difference from where you're creating activities and just creating the layouts, other than right now you could reuse these fragments inside something else. Rather than creating a whole new activity, you could just put two list views here and you can change them in runtime by replacing them if necessary. So you could effectively have just one app that is one activity but has multiple views. Let's wait for our emulator. So here you can see that we have our age and 3 elements and the bottom. So it doesn't really look great. And then here we don't have anything because we don't have anything in our list right now. So let's go ahead and fix those issues. So first, let's go ahead and look at our input fragment. So let's look at what could be the issue that we're having that doesn't allow us to look at the view in the right way. So let's open the app once again so we can see the issue. So this should be called fragment example. So right now our issue is that we are seeing right now, okay, go down. Oh, we went to something else. Okay, and our issue that we're seeing is that we have the age label and all of the other 3 edit text and a button as if it was just a single linear layout that is horizontally arranged. So let's go back to our own elements and look at what we did. So we added the root view, we added the name layout, we added the grid layout, but if you look closely, here we're adding all of the views to the name layout. So make sure that you always set the right information to the right layouts when you're using nesting. So here it should be age layout, because at the moment that we're adding the age layout, we're basically adding an empty linear layout because everything was added into this particular layout. So let's compile it once again. Oh, the other issue that we're having is with this one. We're setting the orientation of the wrong layouts as well. So if you remember, everything was linear, even though our main layout should be vertical. So that was because we're setting this orientation and these parameters to the root layout rather than to the nested layouts that we're using. So that's the main issue that you will encounter when you're dealing with dynamically creating the UI, is that you have to actually compile your application and see what it looks like on the phone, and sometimes there's things that you might miss. So right now we have this age, then we have these other two which don't look right, and then we have the button. Now what is with that button? Well, that button doesn't have one thing. What is it missing? Pause the video, think about it. Oh, you're back. Okay, so we don't have a text for it. So this should be the set text. So we're gonna use add pet as the text for the button. Now let's look closely at how we're adding the layout. So add view, age layout, and then we have to set the text. So let's go to our strings, name, grid, age. Display fragment, input fragment. Okay. So now that we're here, we can once again compile our app. Just look at what else is causing issues. Right now, as you can tell, we notice that the page is at the top as the first one. The second one only has the edit text, and the third one only has an edit text as well. So, what's that telling us? That's basically telling us that for the first element on the layout, the first one that we're adding, the text of it is actually age. The second one is not being set properly, and the third one is not being set properly either. Now the last one, now our button has the add pet, so that's good. We do have a listener, but we haven't implemented anything on it, so it will not do anything thus far. So let's go ahead and look at the age. So age text, name text view dot set text. So you can tell we should be setting it to the age text view, and here it should be the breed text view. So let's compile it once again, and you will see that those changes, now we should be setting the right text views with the right values. Second, it's opening. Okay, there we go. So we have a name, we have a breed, and we have an age. This edit text, we have them set to match width, so that way they will grow with the width of the content that we're entering. And this one, well, our age one is taking letters, so maybe let's make it so that's not the case. So if you remember from one of the first homeworks, there was a little Android property that we could set to an edit text called the input type. So if we go here, let's look for the text that we're looking at. So that will be the age view. So age text view dot set input type, and this will be input type, and this is going to be numbers. So let's type class number. Okay. So this one is the property that will say, hey, whenever you're typing anything into this particular edit text, make sure that they are numbers. If they are numbers, then do not allow that to be typed in here. Now, if we saw on the event handling tutorial, that is something that you could manually do using the text watcher and on click on text change to just manipulate that data one by one. But Android already has that functionality implemented. So right now let's try to type letters. It's not letting, it's not working. So it's still letting us type letters. So that's not great. So set input type and it's the text view. Okay, it should not be on the text view. It should be on the text. Okay, so that should be on the edit text. So as you can see, we didn't have any error because the edit text and the text view share the same base class. So it basically means that most of the things that you can set to an edit text, you can set it to a text view, even if some of those things don't really make sense. For instance, the input type doesn't really make sense on a text view as much as it does on an edit text. So right now, it will only let us use numbers. Perfect. Now, what is all of this wide empty space that we have here? Well, all of that empty space is about half of the screen that is being occupied by our little display fragment. Now, what is our display fragment? It's just a list view. Right now it doesn't have any data. So let's go ahead and get data for it. So if you remember, we already did an example where we had a list view example that had pets on it. So let's just use the information and the code from that. In our fragment. So we're gonna be doing it here on the list view. So let's do this part. We're gonna move it away from it. So we're gonna introduce a local variable, which is a view, which is going to be the fragment root, and we're gonna return that. Now we want this method to be called first, because until that method is not called, we will not be able to get a reference to our list view in the UI. So we're gonna go here, find the references that we did before, in the list view. Okay, now here, it's gonna first this. It's gonna create a list view as a global variable, just because eventually we probably will want to use it outside of the creation. Now, here is the important part. When you're dealing with fragments, you cannot use the find view by ID by itself. That is because find view by ID works at an activity level. So what you will want to do is go over here and finding the information from the activity that is encompassing this fragment to get it. So there is a few ways to go about it, but the easiest way is to go and say get activity and find view by ID. So what you're saying is go to the underlying activity where I'm inflating all of this, and from there get me the pet list view. Then once you do that, just add data to it and then allocate it to this one. So here, remember that you need a context. So instead of this, we're gonna get activity and we're gonna do pets. So let's go over and run our application. I just want to make sure that we are not getting a null pointer exception, which is a possibility here if this wasn't inflated properly. And there we go. So if we look through our error messages, we will see that we're trying to invoke this view on a null object reference. So this view.setAdapter get activity.find view by ID. So as you can see here, this is saying us method invocation may produce a null pointer exception, which is what's happening right now here. So invoke virtual method, set adapter on a null object reference. So when we go here and say listView.setAdapter, listView is actually a null pointer. So it means that we didn't return what we were expecting from the getActivity view by ID. So in this case, what we want to do is not use the activity itself, as we will have done before, but use the fragment root that we inflated. So if you remember, this is creating the UI for this particular XML file. So that means that the list view, the pet list view, is going to be inside of this one. Now this one is going to be inside of the activity, but just going to the activity and getting the pet list view will require an extra step, which will be getting the fragment from there, and then from the fragment accessing this. So it's just way easier to do it here, since we have a direct access to the root view of our fragment to access the reference from it. So let's go once again to our emulator. As you can see, we have two things. We have the name, breed, age, the pet, and the list view. Now what we want to do on the next video, on the next walkthrough, we're gonna see how we can enter information in the upper layer such that when we add pet, we add the information into this fragment. That's gonna be a little bit of a longer walkthrough because we have to work through using shared view models to transfer that information, but thus far we already know how to create fragments. So if you want to play more with this fragment concept, you can simply go to your activity main, and instead of creating the fragments or adding them to your view inside of the XML, add them manually or programmatically in the main activity. So that will be one thing that you can do to explore more on fragments, just doing them programmatically. That's everything for you. You will find the full version of this project as well there. So thank you for watching.